As simple as it is, an argument over selling crabs or not could show you just how delicate the balance is in this entire system. There seems to be a new lockdown battle now. We're seeing the crab vendors in St. Augustine near the Caroni River, in fact at the side of the Caroni River. They're in a squabble with the police. The municipal police moved them out from the area because they weren't supposed to be vending. And I think there's a side of it where we're in a state of emergency, and I'm not sure if they have the proper permission to be vending at this time currently anyway. And then on top of it, they're already vending in a restricted area where they're not supposed to be in the first place. But we see then that when the police moved them, their MP for the area, the UNC MP, who's a member of the opposition, she came out and was on their side and attempted to get some more people to come out in their numbers to speak on their behalf, and the Commissioner of Police then saying that that's an irresponsible act. But at the end of the day, she's a member of Parliament. Her job is to represent the will of the people. So if the people's will is to do such an irresponsible act, is she called now to change their will to what she deems it to be as responsible, or is she then called to execute their will? That's an interesting question. And that's a question that really must be answered when you're thinking about a state and a country. There's a follower of mine on TikTok. His name, I believe, is Trini Libertarian or something to that effect. And I feel the pain for him, because just by the name I see he's a libertarian, and that is a political ideology. If you're a libertarian, you believe in freedom. You believe that the government should have minimal control over anything in your life. And it's unfortunate because the majority of the conversations in Trinidad aren't along those axes. They aren't even in the same orbit as that style of discussion. So when you come and you may have an argument about the freedom of it and whether it's a matter of government overreach and if the government should have the authority to do that, someone would come and ask you, well, what you're trying to say? Are you PNM or are you UNC? And your point may have nothing to do with that. But if you're a libertarian, you believe in freedom and you want everyone to have their own choices and decide what they want to do with their life and not leave it up to the government. But in that turn, then how do we have a cohesive plan to do anything? How do we get people to cooperate on projects where just one individual attempting to do it by themselves wouldn't be sufficient? For something like the COVID pandemic, it needs some cooperation on a regional level, on a local level, on a global level. There requires some amount of cooperation. Otherwise, the virus may never be held under control. So if you allow everyone the freedom to choose their own, then how do we get cooperation? Then the way we get cooperation is by actually convincing people. And anyone on the internet right now, especially if you're watching a video like mine, that means you have some interest in trying to learn and acquire some new knowledge. So you'd understand that trying to convince people of something is very difficult. And then you can see you could be brought to the point where you're in the dilemma of wondering, should we allow people the freedom to decide what they think is best for themselves and risk not being able to have a cohesive plan to take care of some large problems that require cohesive plans in order to really deal with them? Or do we then give that authority to a single body and allow them to make that decision? In a recent interview that the ambassador of China had with our local newspaper, that was part of the discussion. And when asked how China handled their pandemic so well, when stripping past all the other propaganda that is overlaid in the answer, the basic answer is because the Chinese population listens when the Chinese rulers speak. And if you have a population that is under the strictest rules and the strictest discipline in order to listen to all the instructions that are given out to them by the rulers, then in the case of emergencies such as a pandemic, such as the outbreak of disease, or sometimes in the case of war, it's much easier to get one plan going, because we could literally take all these sick people, heap them together and throw them in a building. And well, if it's all about listening to the rulers and what the rulers say, and it's about collectivism meaning the group is more important than, for example, in individualism, the individual isn't the important thing here, the group. And if you have an entire country that can function like that, they would be able to get grander things done. And for example, they would be able to be vaccinating some hundreds of millions of people already, and arguably be in one of the best positions in terms of the pandemic in the world, especially considering that they were where it started and they have over 1 billion people there. So the logistics could not be easy to manage that. But when you have something where controlling everyone is much easier, well, it's much easier to manage. And the question comes in, does the ends justify the means in such a case? Is it worth it to stop the freedoms we give to people, to inhibit more freedom in order for us to have the means in the end? And then, if the ends does justify the means, if you're saying that what we want is to get out of this pandemic at any cost, then is it really a question where the businessmen got their vaccines from? Because if the ends justify the means, the end of this pandemic is vaccination. And if the real question I would have there is, can we be sure that this vaccine is the authentic thing from the actual producers? And once we're sure of that, then I'm fine. If the end justifies the means, then it doesn't matter really where they got it from, does it? And whether it matters or not, it's already apparent that some people are doing it regardless. And I think unless we can have a handle on the actual acquisition of vaccines and increase the rate at which we do it, eventually more and more people are going to attempt to do it like that. There's only so much a government could do to actually clamp down on what a general population does. People are going to do what people are going to do. And there's only a limited time, I think, you'd be able to inhibit them from doing that. And in order to do that, people need to be in a position where they're comfortable enough. But if people aren't comfortable, such as the vendors who are saying that they now need to make some money to put bread on the table for their children, they aren't in a comfortable position, then they are less likely to be obedient and listen. And if the businessmen see that my business is struggling here and I want to be vaccinated, I want to vaccinate my family, and I want to be able to vaccinate the workers in my business to allow them to get back on to work, then they are going to attempt to get it in whatever means they can. So it would be in our best interest to quickly as possible, work out a way to streamline all the vaccines that are coming into the country to make sure that everyone can access it as quick as possible. If you're enjoying the content, click that like button, drop a comment, tell me what you think about it all, tell me what you think about the current news that is going on. If you have a question about something, leave it. I may answer it in the next video. And share the videos, share the content if you think these are the conversations that we need to be having in this country and in this region. If you think that this may be the introduction to some good discussions, well, share it to people, allow the audience to grow. Gary to Amin over crab crackdown. Irresponsible. Commissioner of Police Gary Griffith has said it was irresponsible for a member of parliament to call on citizens to come out at a time when there is a state of emergency and the public health regulations which guide the population in the fight against the COVID-19 virus. In a statement issued by the TTPS on Wednesday, Griffith said it was noted with concern the alleged social media post dated June 2nd, 2021, which appears to be disseminated under the hand of Member of Parliament for St. Augustine, Khadija Amin. The reported message went like this: police currently moving crab vendors from Carney Bridge roundabout in apparent move of victimization. Despite following public health regulations, MP for St. Augustine Khadija Amin is inviting you to come out to come to Carney roundabout this morning where vendors are being targeted and removed for selling goods, fruits, vegetables and soups, fish and crab. The rule of law that we boast of, especially in our Western societies, in our Western democracies or republics, the rule of law that we boast about depends on everyone trusting it. It's like a house of cards. And if enough people lose trust in the fact that it works, then it doesn't work. The police have the authority to move people and to instruct people on what to do because we believe they have the authority to do that. The government has the authority because we trust that they have that authority. But the moment that we find enough people moving against the authority, it becomes very difficult now to maintain this house of cards built on trust and built on belief. And really and truly, that's part of the motivation to keep a democracy going. We're trying to please as many people as possible, trying to keep the majority of people within the country at a satisfactory enough level of comfort so that they don't see the need to try and disrupt the entire country. But the moment that comfort starts to leave, you begin to get more difficulty in keeping people under that control. And then when you have political movers within that space, it becomes even more difficult because by and large, politicians are very good at moving and motivating people. So if you have a politician motivating people against what we are trying to do as a cohesive unit as a country, that is basically one step closer to something as preposterous as civil war. You are attempting to pull the country in different directions. And if a country is going in different directions, if two groups of people within a country see that they cannot go together in the same direction, what is left to do but separate, whether peacefully or not so? And that sounds kind of dramatic to go from stopping crab vendors from selling to a civil war and the country breaking up. But really, what is the alternative? If people do not want to listen, if people do not want to obey what is being mandated to them by the group that sees itself as the governing body of this country, then the other hand is to force them to do it. That's the two options. We either try to convince them or maybe three options. Let's put the three options out there. We force them, we convince them, or we separate. And if we do not want to separate, if they cannot be convinced, then force is what is left. And when we're speaking about forcing populations, that's when we go on to the Chinese article here. A helping hand with no strings attached. An exclusive question and answer with the Chinese ambassador to Trinidad, one Mr. Fang Kui. I hope I pronounced that correct. That was one of the questions posed to the Chinese ambassador. The questions go through the introduction and asking whether he took a vaccine and when he took the vaccine and all of that. But where it got interesting to me is the question that asked, China is vaccinating around 14 million citizens a day and crossed the 400 million mark in vaccinations recently. How has the People's Republic of China been able to convince citizens to take the shot? The answer, actually, while we are talking now, China has administered over 600 million jabs of COVID-19 vaccines, around 20 million shots per day, from 500 million to 600 million. It took only 5 days. I think the reasons why vaccination in China is so efficient are as follows. Firstly, the Chinese people believe in one for all for one, which is deeply rooted in China's 5,000-year civilization. They are well disciplined when protecting both themselves and others for the greater good, especially in face of public emergencies. One example is that to protect the most vulnerable groups, including the elderly, most young people strictly followed the government's advice and stayed home, obeyed complete social distance, and wore masks without enforcement. And the news that came out of China last year said that some of this was, let's just say, incorrect or not precisely correct, because there was some enforcement on these strict stay-at-home orders. There were allegations that some people had their doors welded shut and China was ensuring you stayed home by any means necessary. And that actually goes along with what the ambassador said. China believes in all for one and one for all. That is basically a signal to collectivism and the Chinese principles of communism, where the group is more important than the individual. And when it comes to doing some large-scale projects and getting some things done where you need to command a large number of people, then that style has its benefits. But when it comes to individuals losing their rights and being hurt by it, then that side has its disadvantages. And here's the thing, we experience life as individuals. You don't experience life on behalf of all Trinidadians as a group, and you feel for everyone. And that's one of the problems when we get to collectivist models of doing things. If a collectivist model is put in place, then it could be that this one individual may be worth dying for the sake of, or as we see it, for the sake of the national good. And do we really want a government with the authority to allow one individual to die and they say it's for the national good? Because the national good seems to be a term that fluctuates according to who is in charge. because the national good may be to get vaccines, and some may say that it doesn't matter how we get these vaccines because it's for the national good. And in that case, then the amount of questions now being placed on the businessmen isn't fair. And that's my closing question. How much of the ends can justify the means? And if the ends does justify the means, would you be okay with taking vaccines from places where the sources may be questionable or mysterious, but if we are assured that the vaccine itself is wholesome and from the actual manufacturer of the vaccine? If we can be assured of the actual safety of the vaccine, of the chemical product itself, while we may not know about the processes behind the scenes, would that be okay with you? And pretty much, of course, a government cannot really subscribe and endorse anything that seems to be running illegally. But a government may be able to allow people to do as they see fit. And do you think it's in the country's best interest for a government to allow the businessmen to do as they see fit in acquiring these vaccines? Tell me, what do you think? See you in the next video.
When you wake up in the morning and you hear the birds cry and you feel the music rising with the tide.